Welcome back to another edition of the Musketeer Report podcast. Today is February 11th, 2025. Xavier is ranked 54th in KenPom, 55th in the net. They're 14-10 overall, 6-7 in Big East play. They beat Georgetown at the Cintas Center 74-69 on Tuesday and lost at Villanova 80-68 on Sunday. They play next on Wednesday at Providence, and they are the fifth team out of the field on Bracket Matrix, which is actually one spot better than they were going into the weekend before that loss at Villanova. We'll talk a little bit more of that as we go. Paul, you're back. Thank you for joining me for this one. I think a tough weekend for Xavier fans coming off the loss at Villanova. And the way I phrased it on my write-up after the game was that it's not completely dead yet. I mean, I think there's still, and I think the bracket matrix having them one spot better kind of shows that there are some bracketologists that still have them right near that cut line. The bubble is very weak again this year, and if everything continues to fall apart at the bubble, they win out the rest of the way. Maybe there's still a chance they back their way in, but they've kind of taken away control of their own destiny.
I think that's a great way to put it, Rick. And look, if this team was to go 7-0 down the stretch, I think they get into the NCAA tournament. One, because this year more so than other years, there aren't as many bid stealing possibilities. If you look at some of these conferences like the A10 or Mountain West or some of these places, like you're not looking at as many bid stealers this year possibly as you have in years past. But the other thing too is, with the way the bubble has shaken out and the way a lot of these bubble teams have been playing recently, including Xavier's loss the other day, a lot of these bubble teams are losing games down this stretch here. And we've talked about that a lot, so I don't need to rehash it. But if Xavier can go 7-0 here down the stretch, I do think they will get in. It's just a question of, does that mean they're going to need some help along the way? Is 7-0 enough that they can play their way in just based on an accumulation of wins? Does UConn and Creighton, do those two games bump into quad one, which would mean you would end the season with 3? That should be a good enough margin to get in, but yeah.
That might be the thing right there, because as it stands, I mean, even if they win out these final 7 games, if nothing changes with the current net rankings in terms of teams in the Big East jumping quads, quad 2 to quad 1, like you just laid out for UConn or Creighton potentially, then Xavier has one quad 1 win. And they're just at that sort of line of demarcation, to borrow a Richard Skinner term, of teams that sort of make the cut. Like that 21, 22 wins is usually where you need to be, or maybe a little over that. With only one quad 1 win, and again, I do think based on looking at some of the other teams that are on the bubble right now, the line, the cut line is going to be a little bit lower than usual. The resumes look a little bit weaker than they do in a typical year, maybe. So that'll help Xavier. But even still, man, just one quad 1 win with a questionable wins total seems like it's going to be tough, even if they win out. Now, like you said, I think if they win out, you feel like they've got a real chance, but it's really hanging on by a thread. And then here's the other part of it, Paul. How realistic is it that this team is going to be able to win 7 straight games in the Big East?
Yeah, I think when you look at how this team has played over the last month or so, they have definitely shown that they can play like a tournament team. They beat UConn, they beat Marquette, they took Marquette right down to the wire without Zach Freemantle. For a large portion of this season, they have shown that they can play like a tournament team. But then the flip side of that is, you're up by 6 against Villanova with 12:15 to go. You've held Eric Dixon to 2 points in the entire game to that point, the first 27 minutes. And then he goes and scores 15 straight Villanova points, scores 22 of their next 34 after you just seemingly abandoned what you had done against Eric Dixon up until that point. And to me, that's the question. Can this team lock it in for 7 straight games to get Zach Freemantle into the NCAA tournament, to get these guys? I mean, you think about it, it's not just Freemantle. It's Freemantle, it's Jerome Hunter, it's Marcus Foster, it's Dante Maddox. I mean, there are guys on this team, not just Freemantle, that aren't going to be back, not just at Xavier next year, but playing college basketball at all. And that's, to me, where if there's a sense of urgency about this team, if they recognize that they need to do this, I mean, it plain and simply, it has to start, against Providence. You got to go on the road and get a win like that, and then hope that it snowballs from there against DePaul, Butler at home. They're all winnable games. That's the thing, Rick. That's the flip side of the coin. That's the two sides of the coin right now, right? It's that all 7 of these games feel winnable, but yet the frustrating part is, can they win all 7 of the games?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fans look at it and it's like if you have a 66% chance of winning 3 straight games, fans think you should win all 3 of those. And math tells us otherwise, right? And I think even more so with this Xavier team, we're talking about them winning 7 straight games. Their longest win streak this entire season is 6. That were the 6 games to start the season where you had mostly bye games and, win over South Carolina in there. I think Wake Forest is probably included in those first 6 games. Their longest win streak in the Big East is 3 games this year. That's the only time all Big East season they've won consecutive games. Every other time it's been a win followed by a loss or 2. So yeah, to think that this team is going to win 7 straight games, it just feels like a big ask at this point, and it's not likely to happen. And that's why, we were kind of talking that way maybe a month ago when we first started saying like, yeah, this team hasn't positioned itself well to make the NCAA tournament, and it's just not likely this year. Paul, let's go back to the game at Villanova where, really for the first 25-ish, 30-ish minutes of the game, it felt like they were somewhat the same team they've been throughout this recent run of success. They were in. It was a hard-fought game. I mean, yes, it was ugly at times. Yes, there were some defensive lapses, but that's kind of who they've been as they've been winning games even. They're not perfect, but they've just been playing at a higher level and getting it done. And then somewhere within those final 10 or 12 minutes, it all just kind of fell apart on them. What really stood out to you during that stretch?
Yeah, it just felt like they weren't, for some reason, they became a different team in those final 12 minutes than what we had seen at that point. And maybe it was Eric Dixon hitting that 3 from the top of the key over Zach Freemantle. And that was what really sparked him, because not only did he score 15 straight points, I think in that stretch, he took every Villanova shot. So it wasn't even that he was scoring all the points, maybe it was a second shot, whatever. He was just getting whatever he wanted. And for 27 minutes, they had done so well at not just limiting his scoring, but even limiting his opportunities, making him catch the ball too far away from the basket. He wasn't able to get an open 3. He wasn't even able to take like a contested 3. They were doing everything that they needed to do to limit his opportunities to score. And then, eventually, I don't think anybody would have expected Eric Dixon, the nation's leading scorer, to finish with 2 points. But to score 15 straight, at that point, you're thinking to yourself, where did this get lost? What happened? The turnovers were an issue. Second chance points overall were an issue for Xavier, both of those things. Now, the one thing I would say is the points off turnovers they ended up being even. Both teams scored 8 points off turnovers. The problem with Xavier's turnovers were so many of them were careless, just balls thrown away. They're empty possessions. You're limiting your opportunities to score. And yeah, points off turnovers might have been even, but you're just not giving yourself on your offensive end the opportunity to score and keep yourself in the game. But even Rick, think about it. Even with about 6.5 minutes to go, Davion McKnight had cut it to 4 on that little floater where he got trucked in the lane and put it off the glass. And I think at that point it was 64-60. So you're still right in the game with about 6.5 minutes left. And then from there, it just completely collapsed.
Yeah, and I think that it hits even harder against this Villanova team coached by Kyle Neptune, because fans feel like, we've seen Villanova enough the last few years to know that like they usually collapse in those moments. They usually fall apart. And I don't think Xavier necessarily fell apart in terms of like they had a lead and they lost it in the final few minutes because they were turnover happy or whatever. It just seemed like Villanova flat out beat them in an egregious way the last 10 minutes or so of that game. I mean, Eric Dixon doing what he did during that stretch where you're talking about the 15 straight points, that to me is the biggest thing if I was a Xavier fan, where I look at it, I'm just like, they have a guy, and not only one guy, but Wooga Poplar had some moments throughout that game where he kind of took over as well.
Tyler Perkins.
And I mean, Tyler Perkins, we can talk about in a second, because I think he did play a big role. Sean Miller talked about that and why they weren't able to defend Eric Dixon as well down the stretch. He was hitting those threes. I think that made it more difficult for them to double team him or get the ball out of Dixon's hands. But if I'm a Xavier fan, the thing that would drive me crazy about that is you're watching Dixon just go off and score 15 straight. It's like, okay, yeah, it stinks that we can't stop him. But the bigger issue is, who has we don't have a guy that's done that really all year. I mean, okay, you can say Ryan Conwell, the first game against them went nuts from 3, but it's been mostly that, right? It's been like, okay, if your 3-point shot is working, great. If not, there's nothing he can really do. And that, like, there's not that takeover aspect of it. In Xavier's case in this game, their offense was hanging on by a thread while relying on Dante Maddox off the bench to lead them in scoring. That's a scary feeling if I'm a Xavier fan.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up about how Villanova closes games, because at the 5-minute mark, I got a text from a diehard Villanova fan, a friend of mine, and he texted me and he said, "Don't worry, Xavier has us right where they want him because Villanova doesn't score down the stretch." He goes, "I'm not worried. Villanova's not winning this game." And then all of a sudden down the stretch, obviously that script completely flipped there, and Villanova was able to close the game, where, if you remember, they weren't able to at Cintas. So, and the other thing at that game, no energy. I mean, obviously with Super Bowl Sunday, there was no crowd. It felt like the vibe of the whole deal was off down those last 12 minutes. I mean, I wasn't there. I was not in attendance, so I don't want to speak to that. But just looking at the way the game was played, it felt like a sluggish, low energy crowd type of game.
And I think that's what bothered fans about it too, is it's like that game was there for the taking, and it was like a microcosm of Xavier's entire season, in the sense that big moment, feels like a must-win game. You can really put yourself in a great spot here. By the way, against a team that's not overwhelmingly talented, not well coached, has plenty of struggles of their own, and their season is on the brink, and just kind of a heartless effort down the stretch. Now, I don't think that Xavier didn't try. I don't think that they didn't show up necessarily in this game, because I thought, like I said, the first 25 to 30 minutes of this game, they did basically what they're capable of. But yeah, those final 10 to 12 minutes, and you can talk about the lack of front court depth leading to some fatigue. Maybe that played a role, maybe it didn't. But I think real players that have been through it would tell you, like, yeah, when the game was on the line, when our season was on the line, when we had a must-win moment like that, we weren't tired. We were ready to play. We showed up to play. You know, that, like, the fatigue thing to me just doesn't carry. A lot of these teams are only playing 5, 6, 7 guys at the end of the year, and the best players get it done in those moments. And right now, I just don't think Xavier really has that type of team.
Yep. Yeah.
Anything else from that game? Well, Dalen Swain. I think Dalen Swain has been a big topic of conversation recently, and rightfully so for Xavier fans, because he felt like he had turned that corner. He was playing so well. He had scored double figures in, what was it, 5 straight games for the Musketeers. And then you get into this one, and Sean Miller did say after it that he was dealing with a cold. So I think that clearly had something to do with it. But Sean Miller also said, like, kind of pushed it aside, sort of like he wasn't able to battle through a cold tonight for us. And I'm curious what your thoughts were on Dalen Swain's performance, because I think that had a big impact on the way Xavier looked compared to recent games as well on the defensive end.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how sick. I don't know to the extent of what Dalen was dealing with, but let's just assume, obviously, he wasn't at 100%. And let's assume if he was at 100% and you get the Dalen that you had seen over the last 10 games, I feel pretty confident in saying that that is a different game. Now, whether that was Dalen being sick and that was what affected him, if maybe Villanova was doing something that threw him off his game that we just, couldn't see, whatever it was, I don't know. But if you get the Dalen Swain from the last 4 to 5 weeks playing at that level in that game, Rick, Xavier wins that game. Xavier wins.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I would tend to agree with you, especially if you're getting both the defense of Dalen Swain and the offensive production that he's offered recently. It's kind of turning everything around there in those final 10 minutes, because Xavier not only couldn't stop Eric Dixon and were giving up points like crazy, but they also couldn't get their offense going anymore. So if you would have had a guy that was maybe a little more dynamic to make some plays, playing like he had been capable of, great. But this is also the kind of the issue with Dalen Swain. And the thing that's going to be really interesting as we go down the stretch here is, who is he as a player? Is he the guy that can be a consistent double-digit scorer, and if not a go-to scorer, your second type of scorer going into next year? Are you confident in that? Because you really need to figure out what his role is going to be and what that equates to from an NIL perspective going into next season. And, like, this game would put me, I think everyone was kind of on the path of, oh yeah, he's turning the corner. Dalen Swain is looking like a star rising into next year. And then this game, granted, yes, he was sick, so we don't know how much of a role that played, but this would definitely be another kind of red flag moment of like, all right, let's pump the brakes a little bit. We still need to see more from Dalen Swain. And I think that's probably a good sort of jump off point into a conversation that's worth having about the rest of the season for this team, Paul. Like when you talk about, obviously they're playing to make the NCAA tournament. We talked about them needing to win out the final 7 games. I think everyone's aware of that. But from a fan perspective, if you're looking at it as, okay, they're probably not making the NCAA tournament. What am I watching for? That's been something we've discussed on this podcast. And now we're really getting down to the nitty gritty right before you get into the transfer portal of like making these huge decisions with your roster. Who are you most interested to watch on this year's team, the final 7 games as we head into that important stretch of transfer portal time in the spring?
I would say my top answer would be Ryan Conwell to that question, because I think what we've seen over the last month or so of Dalen and his progression and his mindset and how he's playing has convinced me that another off season, assuming he comes back, and I have no reason right now to believe any otherwise. I'm just saying, anything could happen. Who knows? Let's assume that Dalen comes.
Yeah, I think we have to have this conversation with the idea of like, none of us know what will happen in the transfer portal now. Anyone could enter or leave now. The game has just changed. But guys that have an extra year back, let's talk about them as if
they're coming back. That's
or
that. Yeah.
We think they might come back. Yeah.
Yes. My answer to that would be Ryan Conwell, because we've seen Ryan have so many peaks. We've seen him have some valleys. We've seen him play to the potential that we assumed he would play at coming into this season. We saw what he did against Villanova in the second half at Cintas. But having that consistent level of production at the Big East level in 7 games now down the stretch against competition where he should be able to have those types, not 34 points, but be able to contribute at a high level more consistently here over the next 7 games where you're not playing the top end of the Big East every single night. I really want to see how Ryan Conwell closes this season.
So that last part is why I had him number 2 below Dalen. I agree with everything you said, but that last part is the issue here with evaluating Ryan Conwell over these final 7 games. My question about Ryan Conwell, or at least my biggest concern about Ryan Conwell, is who is he in the biggest games? The big moments when you need him most. This game at Villanova where he shied away, the other 4 games in Big East play where he's been held to single digits have all been big quad 1 or just below it quad 2 games that were important games for Xavier. Those big moments are when you need your go-to scorers the most. Those are the games where he has shrunk the most on the offensive end and not been able to carry this offense. The final 7 games, you don't have any more games like that, right? The pressure's kind of off to some extent, and you're not playing the best teams in your league. So while I am interested in how he does, and you're going to have to make a really difficult decision on him, I'm still going to have that question of like, but can he do it against the best teams in the conference? Because he didn't show that this year.
Yeah, and now I think at this point with Ryan, at this point with anybody really on this team, you kind of know what you're going to get, right? I mean, I see people all the time say, well, if so-and-so could just do this, or if so-and-so could do that. You're 20 plus games into the season. This team is who they are at this point. And I guess, yeah, you do make a good point, Rick, about the quality of the competition here down the stretch for Xavier. Now they do have the 1 game against Creighton, sure, and we'll see who they get matched up with in the Big East tournament. But even still, showing a good progression, maybe showing that, yeah, we know who you are to this point, but there's still something left in the tank that Conwell can give you to put you over the edge if you're making a push to the tournament. It's in there. We've seen it.
Well, I actually, that's a good point. I do think there's a little bit of a like, how much heart and desire and passion is in there. And I don't mean that as like, I'm questioning that he has any, but he is one of those more like low key, casual guys. And this whole team has had an issue with, hey, there's a big moment in front of you on the road Sunday. And you all just kind of wilted in the final 10, 12 minutes. So like as one of the better players and leaders of that group, one of the things you would want to show down the stretch, the final 7 games, is I do have a backbone. I do have a lot of passion, and I do have a lot of pride for how this thing is going to end, because I don't want to go out with a sour taste in my mouth for the final 7 games. So I think that is something that I'll have a close eye on with Ryan Conwell, is like kind of where is his head at? Is he focused on what's going to be best for me when I hit the transfer portal here in the spring? Or like, should I go hit the transfer portal and field offers, or am I staying at Xavier? Or like, what am I doing? Is he worried about what's best for him? Or is he worried about trying to finish up the rest of the season as best he can? And I'm not questioning his motives at all. That's just the reality of where we're at with the sport in 2025. Like, you're asking that question about every single player who's on every single roster in this day and age.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add on that point.
And, we mentioned Dalen Swain a little bit, but he is, to me, a little bit more interesting because it's like, okay, we got 7 games left. Was that just one sick day and you just weren't 100%? Can you bounce right back and kind of these last 7 games go back to being a double-figure scorer, an aggressive player on the offensive end, a really difficult force to deal with on both ends of the floor? Or is it going to go back to kind of, like 6-7 points a game, maybe not taking as many shots and fading at big moments? That would be the question with Dalen Swain, because he's a guy that even if he doesn't do more scoring the rest of the year, you would think the NIL value is going to be pretty high in the spring.
And you have to hope that, again, the progression, you stick around, you're through the offseason, you've seen what you can do now over the last 10 games. Can you then take that to another level? Can you add a 3-point shot to your bag? Can you do things next year, coming back now as a junior, going into being 20 years old, that differentiate you? And I assume if Dalen adds a 3-point shot and becomes at least a threat, I'm not saying he has to shoot 40% and make 2 to 3 threes a game, but if he can at least be a threat, that'll take his game to a whole nother level. And then at that point, you're talking about somebody that's going to be looking at getting drafted. If
Can
not,
I share an unpopular opinion with you about Dalen Swain?
go ahead.
I don't care about his 3-point shot at all. I don't think it needs to get any better. Like, granted, that would be ideal for his professional status. That would be nice if he could become a great 3-point shooter. During this stretch where we talked about him playing so well, he didn't make a single 3-pointer that entire time. He wasn't even really looking to take 3-pointers during that time. And he was a force on the offensive end still. He is so physically gifted.
I know.
When he's just aggressive and being like, I'm going to attack you off the bounce and I'm just going to be relentless going to the basket in transition, and anytime I see a gap, and I'm going to slash and back cut to the rim whenever you turn your head or you lose sight of me. When he's that guy, that's what I'm focused on for Dalen Swain. Become that guy consistently. I don't care. The 3-point shooting, you fade too much when you're worried about like getting your feet set and spacing on the perimeter and looking for your shot. That's not what you're good at anyways. Just master what you're good at first, in my opinion. And I know that's unpopular. I know everyone's like, hey, he needs to shoot from 3 better. And that is the case. Like, I understand why people are saying that. But my thought on him right now is just like, can we get you to the point where you're just always aggressive going to the basket first, and then we'll worry about the skill?
Well, and I go back to what TJ McConnell told us on the Sean Miller podcast, like 2 or 3 months ago when we had him on, and we asked him, what do you do in the offseason? How do you get better? And granted, he's an NBA veteran at this point, and developing in college is way different. But at the root level of it, it's the same, where his point was, why do I need to keep adding things to what I'm doing when I know exactly why I get paid? I know exactly what I'm good at. Why can't I excel at exactly what I'm good at? And yeah, if you're a college student, that's a little different, because obviously you want to keep taking your game to the next level. But to a certain extent, if you're Dalen, I don't think adding 1 3 every other game would hurt, as opposed to a few threes on the season. But at the foundation of his game, that's not who he is. And maybe that's just not who he'd ever be. And if not, then he's shown, at least for this stretch where you're playing against the best of the best in the Big East over the last month, that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
I'd still like to see him add a few more, though. Like, I'd still like to, because if he could make a couple here and there, just to at least show that he could, then it would be, all right, let me blow by one guy a game.
I get that. I understand the 3-point shooting thing. I am king of, they always need more 3-point shooting and all.
I'm not saying it has to be Quincy, but
Yeah, I'm not against that concept at all. My thought is, I just don't think he's gotten to the first level. Like, we're talking about taking his game to the next level. I don't think he's beaten the first level yet. It's like, you're not even aggressive at what you do well yet. Like, just start going to the rack consistently. Don't start worrying about when am I going to get this 3-point shot? How many threes am I making per game? I got to be a better 3-point shooter, because I do think sometimes when he's focused on that, which is something, that he everyone talked about last year, that he's got to get better from last year to this year. He's got to become a better shooter. I do wonder if early in this season, he spent too much time worried about how his 3-point shooting was going for him and finding ways to get more threes up. And it's like, don't worry about that. You're really hard to deal with when you're just attacking, attacking, attacking. And so I guess that's probably enough on Dalen Swain, but I do think he is a really interesting conversation to have the rest of the season. We'll continue to monitor how it's going. Two other guys, though, Paul, that are really interesting names heading into the transfer portal, and I'd probably put them at about the same spot, and here's why. John Hugley and Cam Fletcher. I'd say I want to see both of them, and I think they're both interesting situations in terms of how much of your roster are you basing around those guys? Like whether they come back or not, how important do you think they are? How much of a role do you foresee them having on next year's team? How much can you afford to spend on them this year? And then in addition to that, as it relates to these last 7 games, I'd honestly like to see like, hey, is there a little more untapped potential on one of those guys? Are they showing you a little bit more that maybe you just didn't think was in there during practice or something? But I don't know that we're going to get that opportunity because you got to play to win these final 7 games, right? Like they're going to play this out as if they've got a chance to still make the NCAA tournament. And right now, I don't think those two guys give you the best chance to win games, probably.
Yeah, I mean, Cam Fletcher, since the UConn loss, has played 15 minutes. And John Hugley had a great game against Creighton, but then immediately on Sunday against Villanova, gets a mismatch, gets the ball in the post. First thing he does is roll the ball out of bounds. And that just, if you're going to give yourself an opportunity to win these 7 games, you have to treat these games, obviously, as if, like you said, you're going to get in the NCAA tournament. You have to try to win these games. You have to do what you can to get into the tournament. I just don't know what you're going to see out of those two guys down the stretch that allows you to play at that level.
Yeah, and I think, John Hugley, it was a fun performance at Creighton, even though they lost the game, what he did. I don't know that he has really shown much at any point to get excited about yet, in terms of him being like something that would give you confidence in him being a guy you can rely on going into next year. And I just don't know like how many opportunities are there going to be for him over the final 7 games to prove that. And where does that leave the staff at as they have those conversations? I mean, it would feel like you have to bring, there's no doubt whether you bring Hugley back or not, that you're going to need a big time starting center going into next year. But then it becomes a question of like, can he fulfill a backup big man role for you or not? And at this point, I really don't know what the answer would be to that. I just don't think we've really seen much from him.
Yep.
Any other thoughts on these guys that we're watching the rest of the way?
I don't think so. I'm good.
All right. What about this Providence team, Paul? It's the first time we have seen them. They were playing them on Wednesday night. Bryce Hopkins played 3 games in December, and that's been it. Jabri Abdur-Rahim, who is probably their second best 3-point shooter on the team, tore his meniscus a few games ago and is out for the rest of the year. And Wesley Cardette has played a total of 6 minutes and made appearances in just 2 of his last 6 games. Kim English seems pretty exasperated with that situation, and it's unclear whether or not he is going to return. I know they listed him as a game time decision, but I don't think there's a lot of faith that he's going to be back with the team soon because Kim English just said he hasn't resumed basketball activities yet with the group, even though he's been lifting some weights. So it feels like this Providence team is a little bit beat up and not anything near the team they were expecting to have coming into the year.
Look, Providence this year, they have 5 Big East wins. They swept Seton Hall. They've beaten Georgetown, Butler, and DePaul. If you're Xavier and you want to make the NCAA tournament, I know the AMP is a tough place to play. And to be honest, after that game against Creighton, at Creighton, where I tweeted about Xavier probably needing to go 9-0 to make the NCAA tournament, 8-1 or 9-0 is what I should have said. I said 9-0. We'll see how it plays out the rest of the season. If you want to win your last 7 games here and you want to make this tournament, you have to be able to overcome some adversity and win this game at the AMP. I know it's a hostile crowd. I know Providence fans and the Friar faithful are very tough, one of the toughest in the Big East. But this Providence team is struggling right now. They've lost 3 in a row. They're coming off a loss to Butler. Rick, this is a game that it's going to be a coin flip game. It might be a pick 'em, maybe Providence -1, Xavier -1. I don't know, somewhere in there. This feels like a game to me where Providence is banged up. They do shoot a decent amount of threes. A few of their guys, they're They shoot it at a pretty good percentage, 36% on the season. But even still, they don't force a ton of turnovers. They don't turn the ball over, or they turn the ball over a decent amount themselves. I just, this feels like a game, Rick, that you should be able to go up there and get.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to think so. Who knows with the Xavier team right now? I mean, it's all the things you say about Providence or these other teams. It's like, well, an outside perspective could say the same thing about Xavier right now. Like, where are they at? Where are their heads at? They're licking their wounds a little bit potentially and thinking they blew their opportunity. So who knows what type of Xavier team we're going to see? Who knows what type of Providence team we're going to see in terms of their mentality, their energy, all of those things. But one thing that I do think is kind of interesting about this matchup is you mentioned Providence's 3-point shooting. They really rely heavily on that. They play 4 guards basically, and then their 5th man is usually starting the possession with a high ball screen to initiate their offense, and then kind of like it's a lot of what Xavier's run with their 4-out 1-in offense, where it's like a ball screen and then keep moving, and they're swinging the ball around the perimeter trying to drive. It's dribble penetration and then kick out to a shooter for a 3. That's what they're trying to do. Yeah. Now, for Xavier's perspective, I think that's actually good. In years past, they've struggled with teams like this, but this year, when they went on that successful stretch in Big East play a few weeks ago, they were doing a really good job of switching all screens and matching to perimeter shooters, taking away 3-point opportunities for other teams. Now, they still struggled to defend in the post a lot, but Providence doesn't have a post threat, really. They are really reliant upon their 3-point shooting. So I think this is a good matchup for Xavier. If they can get back to what they were just doing, the last week or two prior to facing a guy like Eric Dixon inside, and they can match up on the perimeter, take away 3-point looks, that will really limit this Providence team's offense. And with their inability to take advantage of Xavier inside, I think this sets up as a pretty good matchup for us.
I do too. I fully agree. Now, it's, again, tough to play at Providence. It's a road trip. It's always tough to win on the road in college basketball, but I do think this is a good matchup for Xavier. And I think this is a game that they should win and to get back on a right track, right? I mean, you're coming back home after this to DePaul and Butler. And if you win a game on the road at Providence to set yourself up for that little stretch there, you're feeling a little better about yourself to maybe get a few wins to get this end of the season going.
Yep. All right, Paul, wrap it up by telling us what you've got in the oven. I know Rebound Rundown is rocking and rolling. It's been great recently. Make sure you're checking that out every day. What else do you have in terms of the Sean Miller world?
The 6th episode, I don't know when you're going to put this out, Rick. So if you're
today.
Okay, tonight, then at 11:30 on Fox 19 is the 6th episode of the All-In docuseries. That's going to cover St. John's at MSG and then UConn at home. So, the low and then the high. It's a really interesting episode. That'll be on Fox 19, then obviously on the Sean Miller Podcast YouTube page afterwards. And we're just grinding, finishing this and turning out as good of content as we can for everybody. And just as always, want to say thanks to everybody for listening and watching and enjoying what we're putting out, but also the Rebound Rundown as well. I always like to give a shout out to that because I love doing it and I do it every day.
It's been great recently.
It's been fun. Trying to mix in some more coaches audio, trying to do some more things that
I've enjoyed that.
Like going a little more outside the box instead of just the cookie cutter preview, recap, whatever, like trying to mix in some more fun of it since the local teams have been struggling a little more lately. That keep it engaged.
It is a tough year for your content matter. I will say that. But I enjoyed listening to you. You've done a good job. Yeah,
between everything going on right now, and then even Kentucky's been banged up. Not to divulge into the Rebound Rundown, but yeah, we've been grinding, but it's good. I enjoy it.
All right, check out the Rebound Rundown. Check out the Sean Miller podcast and the docu-series, the All-In docu-series.
We got subscriptions coming in here?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, we're coming up upon that time, right? The transfer portal is it now. That's when everyone's going to be wanting information. I know everyone signs up like the week of the transfer portal, but it makes a lot of sense to just go ahead and sign up now, get the last week of the season. You do an annual subscription, save some money, get the entire offseason and all of next year as well. So, it's a great time to sign up for Musketeer Report. If you're listening to this podcast, we do have a website to go with it. Paul, final thoughts?
I think Xavier is, you got opportunities here. Just got to take advantage. Senior late, second most experienced team in the country. Go to Providence and try to rip off some wins at home, and we'll see where the chips fall over the next week and a half.
You're such a pro for filling time there when you didn't mean to. See, I thought you put your finger up for a second. I thought you were saying you had something to say. You were just pointing at me.
But I've done this. I've been around the circus a little bit too long to know how to fill some time.
I know. I just threw that at you, and you didn't have anything to say, and you were just like, you know what? I'll go right into a spiel anyways.
You know how this deal works. You and I, we've done this before.
You are a pro's pro. Paul Fritschner, thanks for joining us as always. And all you guys, check out musketeerreport.com, where we'll continue this conversation at the premium message board. Thanks.